Bill, I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about the early days with you and Milton H. Erickson. Some gardening stories or any stories that come up.
Well, I met Milton Erickson, psychiatrist, late psychiatrist and psychologist, died in 1980. I was in university at Arizona State near where he lived in Phoenix. And he came in one day to the art gallery where I was working. I had to support myself as a student. I didn't have enough money to go to university, so I was working in an art gallery. And he purchased the thing he was famous for in his life, which was collecting these Seri Indian ironwood carvings that he had. When I went to his house, he had thousands of them, way too much for his very modest small house. 3,000 of them, a lot. I don't know how many there were, but there were a lot. And he came in to buy one of those things, and they asked me to help him down to his car and help him into his car. He was in a wheelchair. His wife and his daughter were there. So I went down there. When I came back, one of my fellow students said, "You know who that was?" No. Famous psychiatrist. That was Milton Erickson. I never heard of him. You're a psychology major, you should know him. I never heard of him. And it was like fate, kismet, because that day, on the front desk of the art gallery where I worked, there was an article on Milton Erickson. And it happened to be in one of the popular American news weeklies. And it was called Svengali in Arizona. It wasn't a great article, but it described his work in ways that I was like, wow, this guy's weird. And what's he doing? And I got to know about this. And I went to the library and I found papers. He didn't have any books at the time, but I found papers about his work. And they were even more fascinating when I read in that magazine. And I thought, they are not teaching me this in psychology school. This guy is really interesting. He's really weird. And he gets results. And I was planning on becoming a therapist at that point. It sort of inspired me to become a therapist. And to make a long story short, it took several years, because I was very shy at the time, to work up the courage to actually write him a letter. And the thing that got me to write him a letter was, I had then followed the work of Bandler and Grinder because I was studying about psychotherapy, and I read a book, a Virginia Satir book. And in the back of that Virginia Satir book, there was an advertisement for a book called The Structure of Magic, which was by Bandler and Grinder. It was their first book. And there were endorsements by Gregory Bateson, who was one of my heroes. I read Steps to Ecology of Mind and some of his other stuff, and Virginia Satir, and Milton Erickson, about this book, saying this is the most amazing book, and these guys are the most amazing guys. Are like, well, if all three of them, I should go find out about them. And I read Structure of Magic, Volume 1. I didn't understand it the first time through, but I was excited about it, and I read it immediately as soon as I hit the end. Second time through, and I went to see Bandler and Grinder a few months later, and here's how long ago this was. It was $35 US for 3 days of training with Bandler and Grinder, and they were the best trainers I'd ever seen. They were delightful and full of content. And in the first 15 minutes, I turned to my friend with whom I'd come and said, I got my $35 worth already, but let's stay around and we'll see what happens. Yeah. And I was blown away by how great it was. And they said, you live right next to Milton Erickson. Why don't you go see him? And I was like, who, me? I couldn't go. Why would he want to see this? Sure. I said, he's very generous. He takes students all the time. Just call him up. And there was no way I was going to call him. But I wrote him a letter and said, you know, I was between my undergraduate and graduate studies. I was a gardener for a while. You know, I could do gardening for you if you wanted.
You're handling gardening.
That's right. That's what he came up with later. But I could write a biography of you, you know, because I think your life story is really inspiring. But in the end, I just wanted to come see him. So I wrote him a letter, and my roommate, who was not a therapist, who was a law student, one of my best friends, he said, when I went away for a week, and he said, the strangest guy has been calling. And he asked for the handling gardening service. Now, I had no such business at that point. And I was in graduate school, and he won't leave his name. He calls early in the morning, every morning, and next morning, right on cue, he called. I'll handle the gardening service, and I was still asleep. My roommate came and got me. It's him. I get on the phone. I'll handle the gardening service. This is Bill O'Hanlon. Don't you think you ought to survey the territory before you decide to take the job? Wonderfully ambiguous Erickson phrase. And I said, yes, is this Dr. Erickson? He said, yes, this is Dr. Erickson. And I said, I am so excited to get a call. And he said, can you come out on Tuesday at 11 in the morning? I had a class, but I was like, yes, I will be out there. And I showed up, and there's a well-known story. I won't go into details here, but I was a hippie. I really don't care. And I showed up in my white suit, which my girlfriend had made out of polyester. It was a terrible suit. But John Lennon showed us that that was the formal clothes.
It was the way to go.
That was the way to go. And so he sent me to work in his garden. And I thought it was a metaphor. It was no metaphor. I was working in his garden. But eventually, he let me sit in on sessions, and he took me under his wing, didn't charge me anything. I mean, I bartered with him, I guess you might say. And he warped me, confused me. I didn't know what he was up to, even though I'd studied with Manley Gritter for a couple of years, and they said, we know exactly what Erickson's doing. They did not know exactly what Erickson was doing. They had a piece of it,
Sure.
and it would really made it easier for me to study with him. But in the end, I left confused after studying with him, and he died a few years later. And I spent the next 5 years trying to work out what the heck Erickson was doing and make it make sense to me. And my first book, which was called Taboos, came out of that book. And since gone on to write 29 more books, and fascinated with his work, and he's influenced me the whole time. And I actually was the editor of the first NLP newsletter in 1978 and 79. And got certified in NLP in the 70s, and moved more into Erickson's work, and then moved more into my own work as time went on, but always informed by both of those experiences, studying NLP, studying Erickson's work, which I think had something in common. They both were interested in what worked, both were interested in resources, both were interested in observation. And those things continue, and patterns, and all those things continue to inform my work, although I've put them into practice.